We're meant to be scared because fear is a capstone of everything these people do. You are supposed to be afraid. And what better to have you being afraid of than this fallen angel with all kinds of power that is able to manipulate people down to the point where he can put backwards messages in records and infiltrate your mind and devour you from the inside out. It did make me stop and think for maybe about 5 seconds, and then I was just flat out offended by it.
Right.
I was just flat out offended that someone would tell a first-year Bible college student who, by all accounts, had done everything that God had asked him to do up to that point, telling me that I have a satanic influence because I opted out of an optional chapel service.
Yeah, right.
And it almost all goes back to satanic or demonic influence because they've got nothing else.
Welcome to Unbound,
A podcast for new atheists,
and lifetime atheists,
ex-evangelicals.
truth seekers, and free thinkers.
There is life after faith
And life here is good. It's time for a new perspective.
and a better conversation. I'm Spider.
And I'm Shell, and it's time to get unbound.
Well, the devil is definitely in the Doctrine. Not as much in the Bible as you would think, but definitely in the Doctrine, and that is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Spider.
I'm Shell.
And tonight we are going to be talking about Old Scratch, Beelzebub, aka Satan or the devil. The first of 4 episodes for October, all covering kind of creep-tastic concepts. Yeah, it's definitely
Spooky season.
Spooky season, yeah, absolutely. We're going to be following this up with an episode next week on Salem, America's first satanic panic. I remember saying during our Satanic Panic episode that Salem was the original Satanic Panic. Well, it's far from the original.
Right.
It's far from the original. The Satanic Panic goes back way further than that.
Yeah.
But this is America's first Satanic Panic. And we're going to take a real close look at it. Mm-hmm. We live close enough to have been to Salem a bunch of times
Oh,
now.
yeah. I love that town.
I love Salem. I still do. Even in my post-Wicca existence, I still really like Salem. I think that there's a really good vibe in that town. But some really crazy shit happened there that a lot of people are aware of, but maybe some stuff that you didn't know already. So we're going to go into that a little bit next week. Kind of a deviation from the evangelical thing because evangelicalism wasn't really a thing back then. But this kind of puritanical thinking
Yes.
was, and it really hasn't gotten all that much better, and we're
No.
going to talk about that too. We're going to follow that one up with an episode on Pentecostal witchcraft, the hypocrisy of evangelical mysticism. That's going to be on October 18th. And then on October 25th, we're going to be doing an episode all about Halloween and the evangelical obsession with evil. So every Sunday, October 11th, 18th, and 25th, along with the episode that you're listening to tonight, this is our October all planned out. And we've got some great stuff that is coming down the line for you. I also want to announce that we finally got our first patron.
Yes.
And I just want to say a big thank you to Space Cadet
Yes.
for tossing us $5 a month. It's going to be put to good use. And now that we have a patron,
Yes.
and we're hoping to amass more patrons, we're going to start doing some things a little bit differently around here. For starters, the Christians Behaving Badly segment that we've done on a bunch of episodes, the more I have listened to some of our older episodes, the more apparent it has become to me that they kind of distract
Right.
a little bit from the main topic. So I want our main episodes to just be main topic, but our patrons are going to get a few mini-sodes along the way in the Christians Behaving Badly realm and in a couple of other areas, but that's going to be a primary focus. So there'll be mini-sodes, maybe 15, 20-minute long episodes that our patrons can download before anybody else. They'll be released into the wild about a week later, but you'll get them a week early. And we're also going to start releasing new episodes on Fridays for patrons and then on Sunday for everybody else. So as a patron, you'll get new shows a couple of days early.
Yeah.
And we are hoping to start that with the very next episode. And that means that Shell and I are going to be working a little bit harder next week and trying to keep 1 or 2 episodes ahead so that we can maintain that and we can keep our promise to our patrons. This is very exciting.
Yes, I'm very happy about it.
I'm ecstatic about it because what happens in a lot of these instances is that as soon as one person breaks the ice, then you start getting more. And I definitely want to start providing some incentives. And the more patrons we get, the better the incentives we can offer. So if you've been thinking about it and you haven't done so already, the link to our Patreon is in the show description. And you can find that at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. Or you can go to our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search Unbound Podcast Network. And all the episodes that we've done so far are already in there. And there is a Patreon link in every one of those video descriptions.
Yeah.
So that's how you're going to find us. And going forward, we're going to make good on the promises that we've made to our patrons. And now that we have one, let's see who's going to be number two. I'm really, really, really excited about this, and I'm really thankful that we've reached a point where we're being taken seriously enough for people to just say, you know what these people are doing is good. Yes, we want to see it continue, and yes, we're going to help out. So, Space Cadet, thank you so much, and we really, really hope to be able to have more people to thank next week and in the upcoming weeks. And as patrons, you're going to get some good stuff. Not the least of which being some stuff that's all yours, at least for the first week. And I've got other ideas in mind that once we grow just a little bit more, we can start implementing. But if you look at our Patreon page, you'll see what the incentives are at each level. $5, $10, $25. There are different incentives for each, but we need people at those levels to be able to start implementing those things.
Right.
So without further ado, I want to get right into our main topic and talk a little bit about this almost absent character in the Bible that is referred to as Satan. And not only are there really, really, really few references to an actual literal Satan in the Bible, not only are there precious few actual references to a literal Satan in the Bible, over time, a bunch of different characters have kind of melded into one and become this Satan character.
Right.
And without jumping the gun too much, there's precious little to go by here. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, now you might be sitting there and thinking to yourself, well, my New Testament talks a lot about the devil. And you would be correct in your assertion that the New Testament does talk a lot about what, by all accounts, is a literal Satan.
Right.
But here's the thing. It talks about him, but when do you ever see him? When does the antagonist show up in the narrative as anything corporeal as opposed to conceptual? The answer there, simply put, is never or next to never.
Right.
And we're going to show how. Now, like I said, there are far more references, more like inferences to a literal devil or Satan in the New Testament. Satan in the New Testament is more shadowy and is framed in several ways that he isn't in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, we see Satan as the one who motivates bad behavior. We see him as the source of clear and obvious mental illness in the manifestation of demon possession and various types of misbehavior. He's referred to as the accuser. He's referred to as the enemy. He's referred to as the prince and ruler of the air. There are a bunch of different names, but in a lot of these instances, especially when you look back at the origins of these concepts in the Old Testament, it's not just one source.
Right.
So we're going to look a little bit closer at what some of those sources were and how they all got melded into one. The Book of Revelation is the go-to for most evangelicals if you want to argue whether or not there really is a literal physical devil out there. A lot of evangelicals will go directly to the Book of Revelation and they'll say he's the dragon in Revelation. Satan is clearly given reign over the earth during the Great Tribulation. But here's the thing. The Book of Revelation, any time that it talks about Satan or satanic activity on earth, there are very clear references to the social and economic upheaval that take place during an apocalypse. Now, when you hear the word apocalypse, let's also understand that apocalypse does not mean the end.
Right.
It just means drastic change. So, like, when we were in Wicca, you look at the tower in the tarot deck, And the tower is what we used to refer to as an apocalyptic card.
Right.
Because it signaled radical change.
Yes.
And that is what an apocalypse is. It doesn't mean the end of anything. It just means radical changes. So whatever it was that the writer of Revelation was smoking on the island of Patmos, these were the things that he saw that represented various forms of upheaval. So one thing most of these references have in common is that even though some of these references sound like they point to individual entities like Satan or his demons, there are a scant few times that an actual literal devil is ever part of the narrative. And even in those instances, the references are more indicative of how individuals dealt with situations than with a single central entity pulling the strings. We see clear allegorical accounting of a wager between God and the devil in Job, and Satan is alleged to have tempted Jesus in the desert after a weeks-long fast in the desert heat. Think about that for a minute. Take all the time you need, and it should become apparent what was really going on there too. Just a couple of quick things. I did find Satan's Wikipedia, and there's some good stuff. There's some definite good stuff that they picked out of both the Old and New Testaments. One thing that I found real interesting, though, was that even in the Old Testament, there were precious few actual mentions of a literal devil or Satan. And again, most of these are very conceptual, and they don't fit in, or they aren't part of any running narrative.
Right.
So like the book of Job, any fool should be able to look at that and understand that it was allegorical. And most references to a literal devil or Satan in both the Old and New Testament are just that as well. You had references to Satan in the book of Genesis. Obviously, the serpent is always equated with being Satan, but he wasn't.
No.
Job's adversary, we just talked about. Then there are a few references in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, Zechariah and Isaiah, but it doesn't go a whole heck of a lot further than that. Oh yeah, Ezekiel. Ezekiel has, in Ezekiel 28, it's thought by some that the devil plays into the story of the cherub in Eden. But again, there are differences of opinion, and the Bible is never, ever clear as to whether or not these are stories that should be taken literally or they're being told to teach a lesson or prove a point.
Right.
And there's precedent in the Bible for this, because when Jesus spoke in parables, it was made clear that this was a story, that this was not about people who actually lived. It was a story told to convey some kind of moral point. There is precedent for this kind of literary device in the Bible already. The New Testament, yes, is a whole lot more rife with references to the devil, Satan, the wicked one, prince and ruler of this world, the tempter, liar and father of lies, the god of this world, your adversary, the dragon and the ancient serpent. These are all metaphorical descriptions of basically the parts of our nature that are quote unquote sinful or that don't make good choices. But you almost never see this character show up in the narrative. And I can only think of one time in the book of Job where it said point blank that this was God and the devil making this wager.
Right.
But in the New Testament, things are a lot more vague. They're a lot more ambiguous. And that, to me, poses a problem when you then turn around and say that this is a literal thing that people should be believing in.
Right.
It's also worth noting that there is no instance in any biblical narrative wherein there is more than one witness to these manifestations. And that witness is always the writer. The writer assumes the role of the observer in all instances that directly involve the devil. This is most notable in the story of Jesus' temptation. There are only two characters, and the story is not written in first person. In other words, it's not an eyewitness account of anything. That fact makes it necessary that the story be treated as allegorical, not factual. Jesus didn't come home and tell his disciples about this. If he had, that's how it would have been framed. That story, and that's what it is, it's a story, was inserted into the narrative as a means of demonstrating Jesus' sense of purpose and his confidence in who he was. That's it. It wasn't a literal account of an actual event, and by all exegetical accounts was never intended to be read that way. In fact, here's where it starts to come together.
Right.
This is a direct quote from the Wikipedia article. Until John Milton created the character of Satan for his Paradise Lost. That's important. Listen to what it says. Created the character of Satan. Character of Satan for Paradise Lost. The different attributes of Satan were usually ascribed to different entities. The angel who rebelled in heaven was not the same as the ruler in hell. The ruler of hell was often seen as a sort of jailer who never fell from grace. The tempting serpent of Genesis was just a serpent. Milton combined the different parts of the character to show his fall from near divine beauty and grace to his eventual skulking role as a jealous tempter. He was so successful in his characterization of Satan as a romantic hero who would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven that his vision of Satan has displaced all others. And that remains true to this day. Again, you don't get this from the Bible, you get it from John Milton.
Right. It's like John Milton created this character and they said, oh, this is who he is.
Right.
And then everybody ran with it.
And just started making those associations. And you can see where that goes. Especially in modern days, you can see where the whole association aspect of who Satan is supposed to be really comes into play, because they apply it to everything, and we're going to get to that in just a couple of seconds too. Now, since fear is a major tool of evangelical faith, its doctrine takes this concept to all kinds of ridiculous levels and applies it wherever doing so will give them leverage. Nearly all evangelical doctrine about Satan is extra-biblical, and Satan is the explanation for every issue, problem, conflict, disappointment, and tragedy that we experience in life. It's the devil that causes interpersonal issues. Disagree with someone? That's the devil talking. Rebuke them. How many times did you hear that word?
Oh, gosh.
In our evangelical lives, but mostly in college.
Mostly in college.
Mostly in college.
And everybody wanted me to rebuke that demon of anxiety and depression, and the demon of overeating, and the demon of whatever else, bad hair days. I don't know. Just
How do you
a lot
rebuke
of them.
overeating when TD Alfredo's is 2 miles down the road?
And the sandwich shop across the road. You just
Oh,
walk
yeah.
across the street,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
get food.
Bob's.
Bob's.
I remember that place. Oh, yeah. And if you didn't have a car, that's pretty much where you ate off campus.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know about you. I got very, very tired of hearing that word, because it always stuck in the back of my mind. Well, what does that do? I mean, I never felt anything change. I didn't feel any shift in the air or anything like that whenever I rebuked anything. I did my fair share of rebuking things too.
Well, yeah.
It's kind of arrogant. Actually, it's very arrogant.
Yeah.
When you consider who we are and the power that we possess and the levels of power that these beings are supposed to possess. Who's going to stand up to the devil himself and just rebuke him? Well, they told us over and over again that we have authority
Right.
over Satan. So that was the empowering aspect of it. So you could rebuke him and he really couldn't do much. That doesn't really fall in lockstep with what the Bible has to say either, because there's going to be a time when God, according to Revelation, literally unleashes hell on earth.
Right.
And who's going to be behind all of that? So which is it? Does he have power to the point where we should be fearful, or is he powerless to the point where we can just go rebuking everything that he does and then it just stops? I just think of the whole swipe or no swiping thing, you know? I think of Satan trying to do something, and I sit there and say, Satan, I rebuke you. Oh, man. And him just skulking away.
Oh, my God.
See, but here's the thing. When you engage in that sort of thing, and then things become better, even if it's only temporary, then we won. We did it. We got past Satan on this one. We rebuked him and he left. They just lit out of town. It's the devil who causes financial setbacks. If you lost your job and you are a believer in Jesus, well, that's the devil just fucking with you. Okay? All you have to do is confess that your money problems don't exist. Mm-hmm. Tithe your 10%.
Of course.
And anything that the devil could throw at you in terms of a financial setback is simply just going to be set in its place. And things are going to start getting better. Well, how many times did we hear about people's financial woes and difficulties and rebuke the demonic spirit that was causing them to have those problems, only to watch them sink deeper into debt and having more problems and still having trouble finding a job or keeping a job or anything along those lines? It's the devil who causes illness and disease. Oh, don't you just love this one?
I hate this one. This is my least favorite one. I mean, cancer. That's all. That's all I have to say. Cancer. It's like, no, I'm sorry. It's really, really difficult for me to buy this one. Even when I was a Christian, it was hard for me to buy this one just because it's like, wait, my mom was a good person. She went to church all the time. Why would this be opened up for any demon to get a hold of?
Well, she had all that faith, so God decided, just like he did with Job, that it was okay to test her faith.
Yeah, well, that's because in the assemblies, you take every single word literally. This literally happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it's not just the assemblies. It's evangelicalism in general.
Right.
Because I can remember, even at 13 years old, I knew that there was no possible way that the book of Job was about an actual person who walked on this earth and these terrible things happened to him. Show me Uz on a map, please. Right. Show me the land of Uz anywhere on a map. Is it adjacent to Oz? I have no idea. All I know is that you start off the story telling me that this happens in the land of Uz. Why not Middle Earth? Why can people accept that Middle Earth is fictional? But I'm supposed to believe that Uz was a place. And in at least one of our Old Testament survey classes, one of our professors tried to explain that away and tried to list possible places where it could be. You might as well just pick 4 or 5 random places within a small radius and say, well, it could have been this.
Yeah.
And which is, I mean, it's close to what they did, to be perfectly honest. Even at 13, I looked at the book of Job and said, this is just a story. And then said it in front of the wrong person at Word of Life.
Uh-huh.
And you would not believe. And if a person's head could literally explode, I was waiting for this person's head to explode. It's like, who told you that? Who told you that this was just a story? No. Job was a man like you and me. And he went through these things. And God put him through these things to show how great he is and to show what he's capable of and to show how much faith it is actually capable to have. This was a real guy. And I just sort of sat there and I was a little bit cowed because my 13-year-old self, I'm learning all of this new stuff during this week. And it's like, well, you know, I didn't know anything about being born again before I got here. So clearly these people know more than I do. So maybe I should just listen to this guy. And for the longest time, I held that evangelical line that these stories, all of them, everything that happened in the Old Testament was true. It all happened at one time or another. And that included Job. But no, just from a literary standpoint, when you analyze how this story was written, it couldn't possibly be anything but allegory.
Right.
There are no outside witnesses. It's just the writer telling the story, and that's that. It's a story, and it has never been anything but that. It never will be anything but that. And that's true of every story in the Old Testament. There are theologians out there, particularly Jewish theologians, rabbis, who will tell you point blank, no, these stories aren't true. Let's not be silly. Of course they're not true. But they convey these points in a way that should relate to us as human beings, regardless of what year it is.
Right.
And there are plenty on both sides that believe that it's 100% true. So I don't want to say the Jews don't believe this or that or whatever, because there are plenty of them that actually do. But the more progressive ones out there have the balls to say, yeah, you know what? These are stories, but they're stories with purpose.
Right.
This was one of the things I had mentioned a bunch of episodes back, that I actually got to meet Madeline L'Engle at one point. And the way that she described the Old Testament, and this was another thing that told me there's no possible way that she was trying to put any kind of evangelical influence into the stuff that she was writing.
No.
She said something that day that has stuck with me ever since. She said, we need to start understanding that there is a difference between a true story and a story that contains truth.
Right.
And the truths of the stories in the Old Testament, when looked at from a certain point of view, do provide guidance, and they do show the right way and wrong way of doing things in certain contexts. But as soon as you insert Yahweh into the mix, and that narcissistic, megalomaniacal way that he has of doing things, it kind of negates any kind of positive message that there could possibly be. I do think that the people who wrote some of these original texts did so with good intentions. They wanted people to understand themselves a little bit better. They wanted to understand themselves a little bit better. And this was how they went about it. They wrote these stories with all this sensationalistic content.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm not going to try and get into the mind of the people that wrote the Bible because we don't even know who they were.
Right.
But it just seems to me like when you write stuff like the parting of the Red Sea, when you write stories about a donkey warning the rider about an angel on the path, when you write stories with all this sensationalistic stuff, a guy is super strong and then he loses his strength because someone cuts his hair. And then he prays and he gets it back. I'm sorry. I have a very hard time believing that anyone who wrote this stuff thought that they were writing something that was true unless they were seriously tripping the fuck out.
Yeah.
There is that possibility, but we're not going to really get into that tonight. It all just goes back to whether or not you can trust the validity of this entity called Satan actually existing and interacting with people.
Right.
So we talked about illness and disease, and yeah, I'm in the same boat that you are. Don't get me started on that.
No.
I know what science is.
Yeah.
And I know what biology is. And I know that there are internal and external factors that determine whether or not you stay well or get sick. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the devil. You smoke, and you smoke too much, and you smoke for too long, then there can be serious repercussions and consequences for that. But it doesn't have to do with the devil. It has to do with the chemical makeup of the tobacco that you're putting in your body and the conscious choice that you're making to light that cigarette. That's where that comes from. It doesn't come from the devil. Well, the devil motivates it. Well, who is the devil in this instance? Have you ever seen him? Have you ever heard him? What does Satan's voice sound like? I mean, just tell me where you were getting this from other than inside your own head. It's the whole scapegoating thing that we're going to get into a little bit later. It's the devil who causes doubt about your faith and neglect to your spiritual life. I got this one a lot. Now, I'm going to go on record. 25 years as an evangelical, there were only a couple of brief periods where I can say that I was consistent in reading and studying the Bible on my own outside of classes. I mean, it was an everyday thing in Bible college, but I did it for my classes, not for me.
Right.
And left to my own devices, I really never did a whole lot of that, which made me a dead average evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that are sitting in those pews never open their Bible on any day but Sunday.
Yeah.
And they never explore it on their own. This isn't a uniform thing, but it's a majority thing. And it's evident in the way that people present their knowledge of Scripture. It's obvious that they don't take the time to read it. Well, you know what? I was no better, but I know more because I spent 4 years studying it. Right. And went through it literally twice in those 4 years. With all the classes that I took, we literally went through the entire Bible at least twice in that 4 years. So I knew a little bit more than average only because I had had that level of exposure. But left to myself, I really wasn't doing much. And there were I'd say first or second week that I was on campus, and I think I brought this up briefly before, but it's contextual. I'm going to go ahead and just tell this little story again. We had an issue in my dorm room where I guess I was just using a little bit too much electricity in there and wound up blowing a fuse downstairs.
Yeah.
And when I brought this up to my RA, or he was actually the downstairs RA, and I told him that my lights were out, he kind of shook his head and was like, well, where were you in chapel tonight? I said, night chapel is not required. He's like, does that mean you don't go? I said, well, I had some other stuff that I needed to do, and I was preparing for this and doing that. I was like 2 weeks into my college career and still trying to get the whole transition thing down and taking my studies seriously, but also, needing a little bit of a break and release from that once in a while, turning on the TV. And when I turned on the TV, that was when the thing blew. So I was told that that happened because I was neglecting what I was really there for, and that I needed to pray for this satanic influence that makes me not want to go to chapel to leave.
Oh, boy.
That's what I was told. I had to pray that the satanic influence goes away so that I would actually want to go to chapel. I didn't want to go to chapel because I've been to chapel 5 mornings out of 7, and then I'm required to go to church on Sunday. That's 6 services a week. Can you give me just a small break here?
Yeah, really.
And that coming from someone who used to spend 5 days or nights per week at his own church, there comes a point where it's like, look, I need to have time to think for myself. I need to do well my first semester in college. So yeah, while this not at all mandatory service was going on, I was in my dorm room and I was studying and I was watching a little TV and maybe taking a little break and playing some Nintendo, but I was doing productive things. I was taking care of coursework. I was studying. It wasn't like I was just sitting there and vegging out.
Right.
But because I was there and not at that service, I had satanic influence over me that was making me not want to go. And I had to rebuke that in the name of Jesus. And next time there's a service, regardless of what time it is, then I need to purpose to be there. Now,
Oy.
this doesn't surprise me at all now.
No.
But, because we've talked about this aspect of it too, the way that they collect you and keep you, and a lot of it being having you in church or in services to get that indoctrination as many times as possible.
Right.
But at the time, it did make me stop and think for maybe about 5 seconds. And then I was just flat out offended by it.
Right.
I was just flat out offended that someone would tell a first-year Bible college student who, by all accounts, had done everything that God had asked him to do up to that point, telling me that I have a satanic influence because I opted out of an optional chapel service.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But it's the devil who causes doubt about your faith. And believe me, I had plenty of that all through Bible college and even a little bit before and a whole hell of a lot after, pardon the pun. But that was not the devil. It was just my rational mind not being able to choke down all this bullshit anymore. And when it came to that service, that wasn't neglecting my spiritual life. It was me trying to find a little bit of personal balance. There's a difference there. I was still getting used to the whole college experience. And it's like, well, you know what? I do have a couple of quizzes, exams coming up in the next week or two. I should get a jump on this. I should be prepared. I should be going through my notes and doing what I need to do to be prepared for that. I've already been to chapel. I think God will understand.
Yeah.
Well, whether God understands or not, the RA on your floor probably won't.
No.
I mean, there are so many things. And just from experience, I started brainstorming some of this stuff just based on stories and things that happened in some of the churches that we went to.
Yeah.
The devil is responsible when the church HVAC breaks or when the van going to a youth rally breaks down en route. I can remember that one really, really well. We had an issue with one of the youth group vans and we were going to a sectional rally down in Yorktown. And not only did this thing break down, it broke down in one of the worst possible places that it could break down. Southbound on the Taconic.
Oh.
In an area where there's no shoulder.
Oh,
now,
God.
if you've ever traveled the Taconic State Parkway, you know there's no shoulder anywhere on the parkway.
There isn't.
But it gets exponentially more dangerous as you get closer to New York City because you get down into the lower counties and those people drive like lunatics.
Yes, they
so
do.
We were in a really, really, really bad place. Stopped where we were. It was just flat out dangerous. So our youth pastor got us all out of the van. Oh, there were 2 vans. Now we've got 2 groups in 14-passenger vans that are in direct harm's way.
Right.
And what is the solution? Yes, it was a mechanical problem with the van, and no one was trying to downplay that. But they certainly did decide what the source of that problem was.
Of course.
here comes the whole rebuking thing. Here comes the praying against principalities and powers thing. Here comes the laying the hands on the van thing. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit about Reiki when we talk about evangelical witchcraft. But literally, we were laying our hands on that van or extending a hand out to the van while our youth pastor was under the hood and hoping and praying that no one came around that bend and just creamed both of these vans.
Yeah.
So honestly, I don't remember precisely how we got that vehicle back out on the road, but we did. We got to the meeting about 20-ish minutes late, not that late. We got there, and then there was this whole bit where a couple of the youth pastors started talking, and toward the end of the service, like right before the altar call, right before we're called back down to rededicate our lives again, or whatever the fuck it was they wanted us to do at that point, there was mention of what had happened to us en route. And I can remember one of the youth pastors from one of the other churches in our section saying, "The devil lost tonight, didn't he? Satan lost tonight, didn't he? You're here, and you're here for a reason. And God would not let you not be here. He would not let your enemy see you fall. He would not let your enemy keep you from hearing these words. There's a reason you are here tonight. There's a reason why that van started up again. You're here, and you're hearing this message because God wanted you to hear it, and he wanted to reveal his power." So it was attributed, at least in that meeting, to Satan.
Yeah.
Satan killed the van. And then our youth pastor brought it back to life. Praise Jesus. While we all extended our hands or put our hands directly on the van so that it would start up again. Praise Jesus, it just started up.
Seriously, it couldn't be because the van needed a tune-up or maintenance of some sort?
Honestly, you know what I think it was? The more I think about this, the more of it is starting to come back. And I think that what most of it was that the radiator was overheating, and it had started overheating to the point where you could actually see steam rising.
Oh, dear.
So I think that what ended up happening was that they poured some water in the radiator so that we could get there. And then at that point, after all that water was almost evaporated again, somebody came up with some antifreeze.
Yeah. Oh.
And I'm sure that there had to be some kind of a leak in the radiator or in the cooling system in the van, because it started to overheat on the way home again, but we got home.
Yeah.
So again, just a very basic mechanical issue that happens, especially with vehicles that size.
Yeah.
And with the amount of labor that it's put through.
Oh, yeah.
With all the events and everything that those vans were used for, because it wasn't just the youth group that used the vans. Those vans were used for a lot of things.
Oh, yeah.
And they racked up a lot of miles on them. So sooner or later, something's going to turn to shit with those vans. And it has nothing to do with any kind of external influence. It has to do with a little thing called planned obsolescence that is built into every car on the road. Most of the parts in your car, whether you realize it or not, are made to fail after a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
That doesn't apply to every part of the vehicle, but things like tires and brakes and hoses, which is where most leaks in that cooling system are going to originate. Either that or with the radiator. But by and large, it's going to be like a hose, something that is not designed to be in that vehicle forever. Belts and hoses have to be replaced. Brakes have to be replaced. Tires have to be replaced. This is what is called planned obsolescence. And maybe if they had planned a little bit better, Satan wouldn't have been there to make the van break down halfway to Yorktown.
Yeah.
It amazes me now thinking about how seriously I took this. But here's the thing. When you're in a whole group of people and they all think this way, and they're all thinking this way right there in your general vicinity, it's difficult to let your rational mind say, hey, no, this isn't satanic anything. There's something wrong with the van. It needs to be fixed. But then we put our hands out and we touch the van, and all of a sudden the van works. In the meantime, our youth pastor is doing something under the hood. So, no, God didn't start the van. Whatever it was that he did, whatever Band-Aid he put on the problem so that we could get there, got us there.
Yeah.
Next point that I jotted down in my notes is the concept in evangelical circles that the devil is out there to literally destroy you. And they'll usually go to 1 Peter 5:8 for evidence of that, where it says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. That was one of the things that stuck in my mind during the whole satanic panic thing.
Yeah.
Is that the devil was trying to devour our house using Procter & Gamble products. He was trying to devour my mind by putting all this backward masking in my head, because one of the things that Gary Greenwald talked a lot about during that was the idea of subliminal suggestion.
Right.
And he even talked about how there were experiments. I don't know how true this was, but I did actually hear it from a couple of different sources, so it could be true. How there were a bunch of suburban malls that were run by the same company that were having a lot of problems with shoplifting. So they started putting subliminal messaging in the Muzak that basically just kept repeating, don't shoplift, don't shoplift, don't shoplift. And over the course of a few months, those numbers, the shoplifting numbers, came down.
Right.
So he brought that up when he was talking about subliminal messaging. It's like, just because it's backwards doesn't mean anything. Your brain is still processing it, but it's processing it in the background. Your subliminal mind is hearing these messages and they're getting in there. So I immediately started thinking about this concept of being devoured, that Satan was trying to devour me from the inside out. You see how these things escalate, how they bubble up? And this is when people start taking these things way more seriously than they should. Because let's just go on record, the whole idea of a literal Satan is kind of scary.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be to the Christian because he's a defeated foe, right? Well, no, I'm sorry. We were always scared.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And we're meant to be scared because fear is a capstone of everything these people do. You are supposed to be afraid. And what better to have you being afraid of than this fallen angel with all kinds of power that is able to manipulate people down to the point where he can put backwards messages in records and infiltrate your mind and devour you from the inside out. And you know what? They loved making young people think that way.
Oh, yeah.
They loved putting those images in our minds. It goes right back to what we were talking about a few weeks ago. If these concepts are not solidified in your mind by the time you're like 18 years old, then chances are they're not going to have any real chance of getting a firm footing ever again.
Right.
Because your rational mind will have been developed to the point where you're just rejecting it outright. So putting the satanic stuff in front of young people is an effective way of maintaining control over them and maintaining their compliance. I don't know how many times when I was in youth group, the concept of the devil was brought up in various ways. I can remember one particular sermon during one of our youth camps where it was right before the altar call. So the music had already started. You know how this goes.
Oh, God.
The music had already started. So now they're already tugging at your heartstrings. And I forget precisely what this standard kind of teenage insecurity was that he was talking about. But he got right up at that pulpit and pointed a finger out at the audience and said, I'm here to tell you tonight that this is nothing but a lie of the devil. And then silence, like letting us think about this. There were so many ways they can play on your insecurities as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
That I don't even remember precisely what the messaging was before this. But that phrase stuck in my head. And I started thinking about all the times that I had heard it in the past. But here's the thing. You start wondering after a while how much of this is just your own teenage insecurity and how much of it really is satanic influence. Am I letting the devil have control? And it's a scary concept. Because if he is, then what do I do about it? Because as far as I know, I'm doing everything the way that I should be. Yeah. I am living the way that I should be. I'm trying to make a go of this thing called Christianity. And yes, I stumble and yes, I fall. But what other ways has the devil lied to me? Like maybe about how sure my salvation is.
Mm-hmm.
What if it was the devil lying to me through that guy at Word of Life who sat me down for half an hour and reassured me beyond the shadow of any doubt that I was saved forever and it really didn't matter how I lived. You live for Christ because you love Christ, not because there's a reward. Your salvation is free and it is an act of grace. This is what this guy told me. What if he was lying?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what other things, what other lies am I buying into that come from this one particular source? And how much influence does he have over me? And it was a very scary thing, especially on the heels of the satanic panic. Oh, here's a good one. The devil targets backsliders and the unsaved and causes things like car crashes and drowning accidents and things that kill them in horrific and untimely ways.
Yes.
Because he waits until you're in that backslidden condition.
Yeah.
And then he claims your soul. You ever hear that one?
Mm-hmm.
You heard that one before?
Of course. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't hear it, you got enough to think it.
Well, yeah.
You know?
I mean, some of them didn't have the balls to come right out and say it,
Right.
but plenty of them did.
Right.
I mean, I got that at Word of Life all the time. That was one of the biggest sources of this one argument for being saved and meaning it, because that was the caveat that they placed on it, is that yes, once you decide that you want to follow Christ, you're saved forever. But I can also, it's amazing how these things just start churning up. I can remember being told in both Baptist and Pentecostal settings that if you prayed that prayer and you walked away from that meeting or you walked away from whatever it was where you prayed that prayer and nothing changed, you probably weren't really saved. Mm-hmm. So if nothing about your life changed, if nothing about the way that you manage your life changed, if you walked away from that and didn't really think about it much after, then you may not be saved. So,
Oh, boy.
I mean, they install anxiety.
Yes.
They absolutely install it in you. And I do remember hearing that explanation of things from both of those sources, even the one that tried to tell me that I was saved forever because I asked for it. That kind of flies in the face of the whole concept of grace, but it also opens the door wide for all kinds of explanations as to why things didn't change.
Right.
And it almost all goes back to satanic or demonic influence because they've got nothing else.
Right.
They're not going to tap into psychology. They're not going to tap into any kind of science. They're not going to account for anything that we know about human behavior. No. If you prayed that prayer and walked away from it and nothing changed, you're probably not saved. And that's the devil telling you that your old life is better. And that,
Yeah.
I heard it many times. The devil is trying to tell you that your way of doing things is better than God's. Is it? If not, then you need to be down at this altar and rededicating your life right now. Mm-hmm. So always, always a point of fear. And we did an entire episode called The Fear Factor, and how they collect you and how they keep you. And the satanic thing, trying to get you to believe that there is a literal devil, that's powerful. That is powerful shit. And they get a lot of mileage out of it.
Yeah.
Looking back at high school, one of my 11th grade English teachers was a Catholic deacon. And we all knew this about him. And he was a great teacher. We all adored this guy.
Yeah.
But he was one of the first Christians that I ever met who came right out and told me he flat out didn't believe in a literal Satan.
Right.
And of course, the way that my brain had been trained to think at that point, I wasn't going to argue. You see, back in the 80s, you didn't argue with your teachers. Okay.
No.
Some of the kids I get in the car for driving school really need to start taking a leaf out of that book. But we didn't really argue with our teachers. So I kind of kept my own feelings about this to myself. I also understood that there were a lot of different flavors of Christianity and there were a lot of different things that people believed. But this one, when I first heard it, it sounded absolutely silly. Because my mind went directly to, I think it was either the first, no, it was the second Oh God movie, where George Burns explains it this way. The little girl in that movie asked, why there's bad in the world or whatever. And God's answer to this was, I never figured out how to make something with just one side. You ever see an inside without an outside, an up without a down? And there were a couple of other little examples. And that actually was the thing that was running through my head when he said that. It's like, well, then how could it be so one-sided? If there's no literal devil, does that mean that there's no literal heaven either?
Right.
My brain just could not process that Satan was not real. But you know what? How many years later is this? And I still hear his voice, and I still hear that conversation as clearly as I had it yesterday, because it was one of those first little seeds that got me wondering, well, you know what? If there are people out there who are devout, who are in the ministry already, because I had already determined that I was going into the ministry. It's like, let's forget for a moment that he's a Catholic deacon. He has still obviously researched this more than I have. He's had a lot more years to think about this than I have. And this is the conclusion that he's coming to. It didn't change my mind, but it certainly did stick in there, didn't it? The fact that I remember it and remember the impact that it had on me and thoughts that I had at that moment, it stuck with me. It got the cogs turning in my head, but in the midst of the satanic panic, the messaging kind of got lost in the shuffle and stayed lost for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time, I was seeing all kinds of examples of how Satan actually is out there and is real. It was all smoke and mirrors. But as far as I was concerned at that point, it was evidence. It was good enough.
Well, everybody was talking about it. Everybody was saying that Satan is real and all sorts of stuff like that. The Smurfs were satanic. Everything was satanic.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, I had this laundry list of things, and I just want to kind of read off a couple of the other bullet points that I had here, because it kind of ties in with what I was just talking about. They talk about the devil being the motivation to do things like drink and drive.
Yeah.
They talk about him being the motivation to have premarital sex. No, that's purely biological. I'm sorry. The moment you wake up sexually, you're going to start thinking about that. No devil required. Everything that gratifies the flesh is of the devil. That's where the whole concept of denying yourself and taking up your cross comes from. It's the denial of gratifying the flesh. Addiction is of the devil. All things pop culture are of the devil, from soap operas to celebrity gossip. Music that isn't Christian is of the devil. Secular movies are of the devil. Makeup for girls, of the devil.
Well, that depends on the denomination.
True, but in a lot of evangelical circles,
holiness.
at least for younger girls.
Yeah.
I mean, older women, married women in particular,
Yeah.
it's not as frowned upon. But yeah,
Right.
you're getting into like Foursquare and Pentecostal holiness and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. I'm thinking of it in terms of where I was then and much
Yeah.
younger. And younger girls, teenage girls, in certain circles, they were looked at the wrong way
Yeah.
if they wore makeup. I mean, every girl that I was friends with or that I dated in high school, they all wore some, but most of them, it was a minimalist kind of thing,
Well,
you know,
yeah.
and certainly nothing that you could point a finger at and say that there was demonic or satanic influence
Right.
behind how they did their makeup that day. But then there's the emotional aspect of it. Emotions like pride and jealousy and lust, all of these things come from an external source, and it's either satanic or demonic influence.
Yeah.
There are different kinds of pride. There are different levels of jealousy. And there are different levels and different contexts of lust. You got to look at the psychology of it. You can't just rubber stamp it and say this is of the devil.
Right.
Because for starters, that's bullshit. And secondly, when you start rubber stamping these things and saying this is where these things come from, it then starts taking the responsibility off the individual to
Right.
work on these areas that need work. Now, I'm not saying that lust in and of itself is a bad thing. I'm not saying that pride or jealousy are in and of themselves bad things either. But the way that they are framed in evangelical contexts, they're all nothing but bad, and they all have the same source. Let's talk just for a moment, because we've talked about this subject on the show before, but it is timely for what we're talking about tonight. Let's talk just for a few minutes about demon possession
Yeah.
and how that is weaponized and how that is blamed for so many problems that people have, whether it's interpersonal problems, relationships, personality disorders, mental illness. So many things get tagged with the description of demon possession that
Right.
you never get around to dealing with or exploring the real problems. And since we've already talked in depth in a couple of other episodes about demon possession and mental illness. I'm not going to say a lot about that tonight, but just in case you didn't hear our episode on mental illness, I just want to reach out to anyone out there who has been told that they have demons when they have issues with their own mental health. So if that describes you, I just want to take a little brief aside here and say this. If you have a mental illness or think you might, you do not have demons. Let me say it again. If you have a mental illness or think you might, you do not have demons. You aren't being satanically influenced. Your issues have one of two main origins. Either they're experiential, like PTSD, or they are chemical, like bipolar disorder. Regardless of the origin of your illness, it cannot be prayed away, and the demons won't leave you alone until you seek and accept competent secular help. Episode 25 goes into this subject in depth, and I encourage you to give it a listen when we're done here today. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because we've covered so much of it, and you've got an entire episode to peruse and see how much of what I say or what we say, what Shell and I say in that episode resonate with you and where you're at right now. But I wanted to get that out there because I'm certain that if you are in or have been in any kind of evangelical circle and have made any kind of reference to anything related to mental illness, I would be willing to put real money on the fact that at least someone somewhere down the line has put it in your head that you have demons. No, you absolutely do not. Put that out of your head and call a therapist. Listen to episode 25 too, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Now, let's change gears just a little bit and talk about how Satan is huge business in Christianity. You know, the reason why there's such a heavy emphasis on this is because there's money in fear.
Of course.
And the whole aspect of binding and loosing, I think about Robert Tilton a lot when I hear the phrase binding and loosing, because he's always been big on this, and so have a lot of the Word Faith guys. A lot of the Word Faith televangelists talk about being able to bind and loose the powers of evil over your life. And you can bind the devil, and you can bind him when it comes to financial difficulties. You can bind him when it comes to interference in relationships, and just add whatever the solvable problem is that you have in your life that can be dealt with in a more practical way.
Yeah.
And they're going to apply this principle to it. Why? Because there's money in it.
Yes.
And they're going to promise to help you. And they're going to promise to pray for you, and they're going to promise to do whatever it is that it takes to get you to make that faith promise. And this didn't start with evangelicals. It started with indulgences.
Yes.
You know, buying your way out of purgatory. The Catholic Church they really went for a money grab with this. And all of it is predicated on the belief in a literal Satan and a literal hell. What else can we use here to siphon money off of people if we don't have something real and tangible for them to fear? So the whole concept of hell, and then in Catholicism, purgatory, which we can thank Dante for also, they started realizing that there's money in this. Some people have built entire evangelistic ministries on satanic fakery. Mike Warnke, we talked about him before.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Larson, we've talked about him.
Yeah.
And even some of the smaller players, like back in the 80s with the Peters brothers and Joe Vieira and Gary Greenwald, these people made entire ministries and a decent amount of money off of the concept of Satan. And like I said a minute ago, especially Robert Tilton really comes to mind with this one. He's done this so many times over the years, where people wind up being promised that you can ward off the power of Satan by sending money to these guys. Same thing as an indulgence. It's just that you're not buying your way out of purgatory. You're just sort of buying the devil out of your life. Kenneth Copeland does this too, quite a bit. And he's kind of shifted his focus a little bit in the last decade or so, but I can remember a lot of devil bullshit coming from him, like back in the 80s too. The Word Faith guys are by and large the biggest offenders with this. Not going to point a finger at just one or two. They all have used this particular angle to their advantage many, 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 many times. So what does believing in a literal Satan actually accomplish? Well, for starters, it exonerates the individual of blame for their own actions. And that, to me, is a big one. And it's a very problematic one at that. Since we're so busy decreasing so Christ can increase, and our lives are being lived from without and not within, it stands to reason that there would also be external forces acting through us when we sin. Satan and demons become the scapegoats for all of our bad behavior, and all we need to do is repent and acknowledge that we allowed these things to happen, not as assertions of our will, but as the result of lacking in faith. A lack of faith gives Satan a window into our lives, thoughts, and behaviors, and we are then motivated to act according to his will, not the will of Yahweh. Incidentally, the Bible doesn't back this up anywhere, even in instances where it could. But I do want to take a look at this particular passage because I think that it's very telling. As far as I'm concerned, the way that this is worded, and it's kind of word salad. I'm going to go right on record. This is why I'm reading NIV here and not the King James, because the King James is even worse.
Oh, God.
If that's even possible. But I think that once I read this, you're going to get the gist of it. And honestly, I could give you probably a 5 or 6 word synopsis. But here's what Paul says in Romans 7, verses 14 through 20. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. Notice the contrast there. It is no longer I that liveth, but Christ which liveth within me. And now we have, it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me. That is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. Not only is it word salad, it's hopelessly repetitive. And what it basically says there is, don't ask me why I do some of this shit. I have no idea. That's pretty much that entire verbose way of explaining human nature and having a mind of your own. That's pretty much what Paul is warning against here, is having a mind of your own.
Right.
I know what the right thing is to do, so why don't I do it? You want to know what the answer to this question is? I've come to realize that this is very true, and I may have even brought it up here before, I don't know. But here's the thing about people. People are neither inherently good or inherently evil. We are not born with original sin. I mean, you look at an innocent baby. Do you see sin? Of course you don't. People are not good or bad. We don't do anything on the basis of whether or not it's right. As human beings, we are very motivated by what is convenient.
Yes.
And we do things based on how convenient those things are for us at that moment in time. So if it's convenient to do 70 instead of 65 on down the highway, we're going to do it. If it's convenient to cut somebody off in traffic or to steal their parking space, we're going to do it. Doesn't make us good or evil or anything in between. It makes us humans, and this is the way that we're wired. And Paul right here is saying, most of us are pretty poorly wired because we know what's right, but we don't do it. Why don't we do it? Because it's just not convenient. And that is the bottom line. At no point in any of these many jumbled up words does Paul suggest satanic influence. This is what I find really interesting here, because he had a prime opportunity to bring the devil into this and didn't. He kept it about himself. He kept it about his own inner conflict with his faith and didn't bring the devil into it, which I've read this many times, and it's not the first time that thought has crossed my mind about this, especially when I was in the thick of it, because I remember thinking to myself, reading this in Bible college, and why isn't there anything about demonic influence in here? Why do we not see anything about anything satanic? It's all, okay, this is the stuff that goes on in my head. I know what the right thing is to do, but I don't do it. Well, isn't that because the devil is motivating you to act and behave a certain way? Apparently, Paul either didn't think so or he didn't think that it was an important enough concept to bring up because it's not there. So, again, at no point does Paul suggest any kind of satanic influence here, but simply the presence of sin that is taught to be in everyone from birth, long before anyone has the chance to be satanically influenced. There is also a contradiction here to the notion of Christ's atonement. Most Pentecostal pastors will tell you that sin cannot and does not reside in the hearts of believers because, quote, the blood washes our sins away, 1 John 1:7, and he who the Son sets free is free indeed, according to John 8:36. Here, Paul is saying that weeds can crop up in this perfect, unspoiled garden that is the blood-washed soul of the believer, and sin can take over. This is likely where some evangelical denominations get the idea that salvation is provisional and not permanent. These verses kind of suggest that the old ways can start creeping back in. And there are other verses that do that too. But that passage has always stood out.
Yeah.
Because it always felt to me like he missed the mark, that he could have really pointed a finger of blame at Satan at that moment, and for whatever reason, chose not to. To the average evangelical, habitually sinful behavior in a Christian must be the result of satanic influence or demonic oppression. Either that, or like I said earlier, that they were never saved in the first place. But then there's the satanic aspect of that too. Well, the devil kept you from really believing at that point in time, and you chose to listen to those voices as opposed to the call of Christ on your life. I heard that a few times too. The spirit of sin is what is making them do things that are considered to be sinful, from the innocuous, like skipping church, to damnably sinful acts like fornication. Ooh, fornication. Ooh. So much for free will, right? And the lines between the two are so blurred that both terms have come to have the same basic meaning over time. Satanic influence and demonic oppression, they've pretty much become synonymous in evangelical circles. Being taught to believe in a literal Satan who has the power to have influence over the things we do leads to other problems too, most of which revolve around excusing the individual from personal responsibility when they commit actions that are deemed sinful or worse. Some attempt to cite satanic and demonic influence as a means of escaping consequence for various crimes. Richard Ramirez and Sean Sellers come quickly to mind. And there are many others, mostly less high profile. Yeah. But there are plenty of instances where people have claimed demonic or satanic influence over momentary behaviors.
Right.
I mean, the law has provisions for temporary insanity. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no the devil made me do it defense.
No,
at least not yet.
There really isn't.
We haven't completely devolved into theocracy yet, so that's not quite a thing. Although when we get to talking about Salem, we're going to have a little discussion about spectral evidence.
Oh, gosh.
Which is, there's so much there.
Oh, there's the whole thing.
There's so much there. But, that's just a little tease. We're going to stay on point with this. Honestly, none of this is terribly surprising coming from a religion that externalizes every experience, thought, and decision that make up our experience of life and how we live it. Either we are letting Christ live through us, or we are supplicating to and being controlled by Satan. If we adhere to evangelical doctrine, it has nothing to do with us. These decisions and behaviors come from somewhere else. And as I was writing down those words in my notes, the words to Metallica's Sad But True started running through my head. If you've never heard this song, I have a link to it on YouTube in the show notes. Unfortunately, we can't just play it.
No.
There's truth to a lot of what this song says. And for those of you not in the know, it's not like a movie. I'm not spoiling anything by talking about a song. It goes through all of these things, all the fears, all of the bad decisions, bad choices that we make in life, and the things that we have this tendency to externalize, like saying the devil made me do it. This entire song is about things that we externalize. And then the punchline comes at the end. I think I can get away with just reading a couple of lines. I'm your truth, telling lies. I'm your reason, alibis. I'm inside. Open your eyes. I'm you. Sad but true. So it takes all of these things that we externalize and that we scapegoat, and that word is even used in this song. It takes all of these things that we like to scapegoat about ourselves and not think about being part of ourselves,
Right.
and just throws it back in your face and says, you know what? No, this doesn't have any external source. It's not any external influence. It's all inside you. Now deal with it.
Right.
And that's what I love about this song. The gut-wrenching honesty of it.
Yeah.
Definitely one of my favorites. Didn't like it that much back in the day because of that messaging.
Right.
Because, of course, my brain went directly to, but half of this song is about, like, demonic possession. It's about satanic influence. No, it's not. It's about the things that we do that we don't like about ourselves. All of that stuff that Paul was talking about. I know what I should do, but I don't do it. That's what that song is about. It's about that inner conflict over things that we know we should do, things that we know we should be, things that we should be aspiring to but don't. That's what that song is about. And then it just turns around and says, well, you know what? You got no one to blame for this shit but you.
Yeah.
Because that's where it comes from. It all comes from inside you. And it's very, very true. The only entity in this entire universe who has any influences over the choice you make, the things you do, or the things you say is you. There is no external evil force that can make you sick, take your job away, or orchestrate any kind of personal loss or calamity. When you start understanding this, you start holding yourself responsible. Personal responsibility is something that few people out there really want to embrace. And that has nothing at all to do with religion. It's a people thing. And that's what that Metallica song was about. Don't go looking for a scapegoat to lay your problems on. It doesn't work. It doesn't work when you lay them at the foot of the cross, and it doesn't work by confessing things like the devil made me do it. When you get a good taste of what personal accountability feels like, you start understanding that in any case over which you have control, you determine how things are going to be. The outcome won't be decided through prayer. It won't be decided through reading the Bible. It won't be decided by rebuking anything or casting anything out or exorcising anything. It won't be decided by how faithfully you attend church. It will be decided by you determining to be the kind of person you want to be, making mistakes, learning from them, and growing as an individual. Don't go on living shackled either to a deity who claims he can save you or an evil force that wants to destroy you. Those shackles exist only in your mind. Stop deferring to Satan when you make bad choices. Stop blaming external forces for the problems that exist in your life. Start taking responsibility for yourself and how you live. Because you know what? There is no devil. There is no God either. There's just you and the choices that you make, so make good ones. The devil isn't doing it or making you do it. And understanding that will get you one step closer to getting and staying unbound. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Unbound. Show topics are chosen based on their timeliness, relevance, and social impact. Have suggestions for future topics? Email us at unbound.podcast.network@gmail.com with all your comments and feedback. Please don't forget to like, share, and throw a few 5-star ratings our way, and follow us on all major social platforms. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Links to our social pages, as well as a full list of cited sources in today's episode, are listed in the show notes, available at our website, getunbound.org. That's get-unbound.org. If you value this resource and would like to see it continue, please consider supporting us on Patreon at the link in the show description. And be sure to check for new updates every Sunday when we'll come together again and take one more step toward getting and staying unbound.